I sat quietly at the corner of the dining table, the crystal chandelier overhead casting shimmering rays of light onto the expensive porcelain dinnerware. The Robinson family's sprawling suburban Austin villa stretched out around me, with its pristine white walls and large glass doors opening to a meticulously manicured garden. The aroma of roasted turkey mingled with the scent of fine red wine, but the atmosphere in this room to me felt like a battlefield. The Robinson family's annual Thanksgiving dinner was not just a family gathering. It was a stage, a platform where my siblings competed to outshine each other. And I, Matt Robinson, 35, a freelance programmer, was always the outsider. I took a sip of wine, trying to keep my gaze from drifting to my sister Amelia's face across the table, where she was animatedly describing her newly acquired penthouse in Miami. "The apartment has a view of Biscayne Bay, you guys," she said, her voice brimming with excitement, her hands gesturing as if painting the scene for everyone. "The furniture is custom-made from Italy and the balcony is so big I could host a party for 100 people." My mother, seated at the head of the table, nodded proudly, her eyes gleaming as if she herself owned the penthouse. My father, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, smiled, but I knew he was calculating something in his mind. Perhaps the value of the apartment or how Amelia was solidifying her position in the family. I scooped a spoonful of mashed potatoes into my mouth, trying to focus on the creamy richness instead of the boasts flooding the room. But then my brother Ethan spoke up, and I knew I couldn't escape much longer. "As for me," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair, his tone confident like a seasoned orator, "my new startup just got valued at $75 million, folks. Last week I met some guys in Silicon Valley and they said this is the next big hit. I might sell it to Google or Amazon next year." The table erupted in gasps and murmurs of admiration. Uncle Frank, always enthusiastic about rags to riches stories, clapped loudly. "That's the Robinson spirit," he shouted, making me want to shrink into myself. I said nothing, just quietly cut a piece of turkey, but Amelia's eyes found me. "What about you, Matt?" she asked, her voice sweet but laced with insinuation. "Still working in that little apartment in East Austin? Anything new, little brother?" All eyes turned to me and I felt the atmosphere, a mix of curiosity, pity, and a hint of mockery. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone steady. "Same old, sis. Writing code, doing some freelance projects, nothing special." Amelia smiled, but it was the smile of a victor, as if she'd just scored a point in a game I had no interest in playing. "Matt," Ethan interjected, his voice dripping with feigned concern, "you should try investing in a startup like me. Freelancing like that forever, it's tough. Want me to hook you up with a job at my company? Need something stable?" The table chuckled and I felt the heat rising to my face. I wanted to say something, to shout that I didn't need their pity, that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. But I just gave a faint smile, nodded, and took another sip of wine. They didn't know. No one in this room knew. The truth is, I, Matt Robinson, am not just a freelance programmer living in a small apartment in East Austin, driving an old Toyota Camry and wearing plain t-shirts. I am the founder of Blue Spark Labs, an anonymous company that has developed and sold a series of tech applications to Google, totaling $150 million in value. My AI applications and data optimization tools are used globally, from major corporations to nonprofit organizations. I also own a portfolio of investments in small but promising tech startups, projects I believe will change the world in their own way. But my family? They know nothing. To them, I'm just Matt, the eccentric, the failure, the one who refuses to grow up and chase their superficial glories. I don't entirely blame them. The Robinsons have always been like this, a family of show-offs. My father, a shrewd tech investor, built Robinson Ventures in the 80s, and he's always prided himself on our family being the shapers of the future. Amelia, with her expensive fashion sense and knack for networking, has become the face of the fund, charming investors with her smile and grandiose stories. Ethan, with his over-the-top confidence and ability to sell ideas, has made himself the new star of Silicon Valley. And me? I chose a different path. I don't need mansions or yachts. I just want to write code, create things that matter, and live a life that feels comfortable to me. But to my family, that's a sign of failure. The dinner continued and the conversation shifted to a new topic, one that made my heart race. "Have you all heard the news?" Uncle Frank said, his voice full of excitement. "Google just acquired an app from BlueSpark Labs, a mysterious company. No one knows who owns it, but they're making waves in the tech industry. They say the app is worth tens of millions." My mother raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "BlueSpark Labs? Aren't they a major partner of our fund, Charles?" she asked my father. My father nodded, but I noticed the tension in his eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice lower than usual. "They're one of Robinson Ventures' biggest investors, but recently they've started auditing the fund's finances. Seems they're not happy with how we're using the money." Amelia let out a forced laugh. "Auditing? Who do they think they are? Some nameless company daring to scrutinize the Robinsons?" Ethan shrugged, but I could see he was uneasy, his fingers tapping on the table. I bit my lip, keeping my expression neutral. They didn't know that BlueSpark Labs wasn't just some nameless company. It was my company, and the audits my father mentioned? I was the one who ordered them. For years I've invested in Robinson Ventures, not to show off like my family, but because I thought I could help the fund grow. But recently I discovered irregularities. Ethan had diverted a large sum from the fund to buy a vineyard estate in Napa Valley, calling it a personal investment. Amelia had been listing personal expenses, from yachts to lavish parties, as client entertainment costs for the fund. I didn't want to believe my family would misuse funds like this, but the evidence was clear as day. I looked around the table, at the smiling faces, the clinking wine glasses. They didn't know that I knew everything. They didn't know that I held audit reports that could shatter the Robinson family's reputation. And they certainly didn't know that I, Matt, the one they mocked for his small apartment and old car, was the mastermind behind BlueSpark Labs, the one who could turn their world upside down. "Matt, you okay?" my mother asked, pulling me from my thoughts. I startled, giving a strained smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, Mom." She nodded, but her eyes held a trace of worry. Maybe she sensed something simmering beneath my calm exterior. I knew I couldn't keep this secret forever. Sooner or later I'd have to confront them, not here, not at this Thanksgiving dinner, but somewhere else, at another time, when the truth would come to light. The dinner dragged on for a few more hours, filled with endless boasts. Amelia talked about her plans for a yacht party in Miami. Ethan raved about new investors he was about to meet. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the upcoming Robinson Ventures shareholder meeting, where I would appear not as Matt Robinson, the failed programmer, but as Matt Robinson, chairman of BlueSpark Labs. I thought about the audit reports waiting on my computer, the numbers that would stun my family. And I thought about the moment they'd realize I wasn't who they thought I was. When the dinner ended, I stood, said my goodbyes, and left the villa. I stepped outside, the cold November Austin air hitting my face. I glanced back at the brightly lit house, hearing the laughter still echoing from within. They don't know, I thought. They don't know I'm ready to change everything. I climbed into my old Toyota Camry, started the engine, and drove back to my small apartment in East Austin. But inside, I felt a fire burning, not anger, but determination. I would show them, not to boast, not to prove I was better, but to protect what I'd built and to remind them that success isn't what they're chasing. That night, lying on the simple bed in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. I thought about the months spent coding in this room, the sleepless nights perfecting applications now used worldwide. I thought about BlueSpark Labs, about the projects I'd quietly funded, from free educational apps for underprivileged students to medical tools saving thousands of lives. And I thought about my family, who looked at me with pity, unaware that I'd chosen a different path, one they'd soon have to face. The shareholder meeting was approaching, and when it came, everything would change. I stood in front of the mirror in my small East Austin apartment, adjusting the dark blue dress shirt I rarely wore. It wasn't a suit, not one of the impeccably tailored outfits my father or Ethan would don. Just a simple shirt, but formal enough to ensure no one would mistake me for an outsider at today's shareholder meeting. I looked into my own eyes in the mirror, searching for a spark of courage, a trace of resolve. Today wasn't just a meeting. Today was the day I stepped out of the shadows, the day I showed my family and their entire world who I really am. I grabbed my worn leather briefcase, which held the audit reports I'd spent weeks preparing. Numbers, transactions, evidence of how Ethan and Amelia had misused funds from Robinson Ventures. I didn't want to do this, didn't want to turn my family into adversaries, but I had no choice. If I didn't act, Blue Spark Labs, the company I'd poured my sweat and soul into, would be tainted by their mistakes. More than that, I wanted them to understand that success isn't about yachts or penthouses, it's about responsibility, transparency. I drove my old Toyota Camry to downtown Austin, where the Robinson Ventures office building stood proudly among gleaming glass skyscrapers. Every time I entered this place, I felt like a stranger. My entire family, my father, Amelia, Ethan, belonged to this world. A world of million-dollar handshakes, polished smiles, and grandiose promises. Me? I belonged to my small apartment, to late nights coding, to tech projects I believed could change millions of lives. But today I would step into their world and I would shake it to its core. The meeting room on the 20th floor was spacious, with a long walnut table and luxurious leather chairs. Through the large glass windows, I could see the late afternoon sun casting a glow over Austin's skyline, the shimmering buildings a reminder of this city's ambition. The shareholders were already present, familiar faces from the tech investment world, along with my father, Amelia, and Ethan. Amelia wore a striking red business dress, her hair swept up, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. Ethan was more casual, his shirt unbuttoned at the top, his confident smile suggesting he owned the room. My father sat at the head of the table, as stern as ever, though I noticed a hint of tension in the way he tapped his fingers on the surface. I walked in, and all eyes turned to me. Amelia raised an eyebrow, her smile tinged with mockery. "Matt," she said, her voice laced with surprise, "what are you doing here? This is a shareholder meeting, not a family reunion." A few chuckles rippled through the other shareholders, but I ignored them. I gave a faint smile, set my briefcase on the table, and pulled out a chair. "Matt is a shareholder in the fund," my father said, his voice calm but carrying a note of suspicion. "He has a right to be here." Ethan shrugged, looking at me as if I were a joke. "Probably a small stake, right, Matt? A little fun investment?" He laughed loudly and a few others joined in. I didn't respond, just opened my briefcase and pulled out the stack of audit reports. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression steady. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm not here today as Matt Robinson, Amelia and Ethan's younger brother. I'm here as the chairman of Blue Spark Labs, one of the largest investors in Robinson Ventures." The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. Amelia let out a short laugh as if she thought I was joking. Ethan frowned, his eyes scanning me for any sign of deception. My father sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. "Blue Spark Labs?" Mr. Harris, an older shareholder, spoke up. "The company that just sold an app to Google for tens of millions? You're the chairman?" I nodded, placing the stack of reports on the table. "Yes, Mr. Harris. I am the founder and owner of Blue Spark Labs. And today I'm here to discuss how Robinson Ventures has been using the capital from us and from other shareholders." Amelia shot up from her chair, her voice shrill, almost cracking with shock. "Matt, what are you talking about? This is a joke, right? Blue Spark Labs is a major company, not something you could run from your rundown apartment." Ethan laughed loudly, but I saw the unease in his eyes. "He's just trying to get attention," he said, turning to the shareholders. "Matt's a freelance programmer. He can't be the chairman of Blue Spark Labs. Right, Dad?" My father looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him hesitate. "Matt, he said slowly. "If this is a joke, it's highly inappropriate." I didn't answer, just slid the reports toward him. "Dad, I suggest you read these. These are the results of the audit Blue Spark Labs conducted on Robinson Ventures' finances, and what we found isn't pretty." The atmosphere in the room grew stifling. I saw Amelia's hands clench, her red-painted nails digging into her palms. Ethan sat down, the smile wiped from his face. I continued, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Over the past 3 years, Robinson Ventures has received over $50 million from Blue Spark Labs. But a significant portion of that money has been misused. Specifically, Ethan diverted $12 million to purchase a vineyard estate in Napa Valley, recorded as a personal investment. Amelia listed over $8 million in personal expenses, from yachts to lavish parties, as client entertainment costs for the fund. The room erupted. Shareholders murmured, some flipping through the reports, the numbers and evidence I'd meticulously prepared now laid bare before them. Amelia shouted, her voice trembling. "This is slander. Matt, how dare you accuse us like this? Who do you think you are?" Ethan slammed the table, standing up. "He's lying. I didn't do anything wrong. Matt, you're just a failed programmer, jealous of my success." I looked straight into Ethan's eyes, anger flaring inside me, but I held it back. "Failed?" I said, my voice low but heavy with weight. "You think I'm a failure because I don't boast like you and Amelia? You think I'm a failure because I live in a small apartment and drive an old car? Blue Spark Labs has sold 3 applications to Google, totaling $150 million. Our AI tools and data optimization systems are used globally. And I, Matt Robinson, am the one behind it all, not some mysterious tech mogul like you all thought." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Amelia sank into her chair, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. Ethan stared at me, his eyes flickering between shock and rage. My father picked up the reports, flipping through the pages, his hands trembling slightly. "Matt," he said, his voice hoarse, "why didn't you tell us? Why did you keep this a secret?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I didn't want to be part of this boasting game, Dad. I didn't want my success to be measured by the money in my account or the size of my house. I wanted to create things that matter, like the free educational and medical apps Blue Spark Labs develops, but I can't let my family destroy what I've built. These violations," I pointed at the reports, "have to stop." Mr. Harris, the older shareholder, stood up, his voice stern. "If these reports are accurate, this is a serious scandal. We need an independent investigation immediately." Other shareholders nodded, and I saw Amelia cover her face with her hands. Ethan tried to protest. "Everyone, listen to me. This is just a misunderstanding. I can explain." But no one was listening to him anymore. Their eyes were on me now. Not with mockery as before, but with a newfound respect and a hint of fear. I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. I had done what I never thought I would, confronted my family, exposed the truth in front of strangers. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep sadness mixed with relief. My secret was out, and now everything would change. The meeting dragged on for another hour with heated arguments and relentless questions from the shareholders. I answered each one, providing more evidence, explaining how Blue Spark Labs had uncovered the violations. When the meeting ended, I left the room without looking back at Amelia or Ethan. My father called after me, but I just shook my head. "We'll talk later, Dad," I said, then walked out of the building back to my old car. As I drove home, my heart felt both heavy and light. I had done the right thing, but I knew the cost. My family wouldn't forgive me easily. Amelia and Ethan would find ways to retaliate or at least try to salvage their reputations. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived in the shadows for too long, and now the light had broken through. Blue Spark Labs was no longer a secret, and Matt Robinson was no longer the failure they thought he was. That evening, as I was reviewing emails from the Blue Spark Labs team, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, as if someone were trying to pound the door with sound. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who was out there. I had been expecting this moment since I left the shareholder meeting that morning, but I hadn't anticipated it would come so soon. I opened the door, and there stood my father, Amelia, and Ethan. My father and Amelia had their arms crossed, lips pressed tight as if holding back a storm. Ethan was different. He practically lunged forward, his face flushed with anger as if one wrong word would lead to a punch. "Matt," he growled, "what the hell do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer immediately, just stepped back and gestured for them to come in. My apartment was simple, almost crude compared to their world. An old sofa, a small wooden table, and a few cheap paintings on the walls. Amelia glanced around, her nose wrinkling slightly as if the space itself was an insult. My father stood still, hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for some clue about the son he thought he knew. Ethan, unable to wait, stepped closer, pointing a finger in my face. "You've ruined our family, Matt. Those reports, you dared to slander me and Amelia in front of the shareholders? Are you trying to destroy Robinson Ventures?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Sit down, Ethan," I said, my voice low but firm. "All of you, sit. We need to talk." Amelia let out a scornful laugh but pulled out a chair and sat next to my father. Ethan didn't. He stood there, fists clenched, his eyes burning into me. "I'm not sitting," he snapped. "You owe me an explanation. Blue Spark Labs, you think you can fool anyone with that chairman act? You're just a failed programmer." Ethan's words cut like a knife, but I didn't let them shake me. I'd heard words like these my whole life. From him, from Amelia, even from my father. I pulled out a chair and sat across from them, placing my hands on the table, looking each of them in the eye. "I'm not slandering anyone," I said. "Those reports are the truth. Ethan, you diverted $12 million from the fund to buy a vineyard estate in Napa Valley. Amelia, you listed $8 million in personal expenses, yachts, parties, jewelry, as client entertainment. I have proof. Every transaction, every invoice. If you want, I can send them to the regulators tomorrow morning." Amelia's face paled, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. "Matt, how dare you?" she whispered, her voice cracking with shock and anger. "We're family. You think you can ruin my reputation, our family's reputation, just because of your secret company?" My father raised a hand, silencing Amelia. He looked at me, his eyes now not just disappointed but tinged with fear. "Matt," he said, his voice hoarse, "why didn't you tell us? Why did you hide Blue Spark Labs? You're my son. You should have shared this with your family." A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. My father's words, though softer than Ethan's or Amelia's, hit harder. I wanted to shout, to ask why, for all these years, he never truly saw me, not Matt the eccentric, but Matt who had built something extraordinary. But I held back, taking a deep breath. "Dad, I tried," I said, my voice starting to waver. "I tried to tell the family about what I was doing, but no one listened. Every time I opened my mouth, Amelia and Ethan mocked me. You were always too busy with the fund, with their grand plans. I didn't want to boast, didn't want to turn my success into a comparison game like this family always plays. I just wanted to work, to create things that matter." Ethan laughed, but it was a strained, nervous laugh. "Matter?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You call ruining your family something that matters? Who do you think you are, Matt? A hero? You're just a jealous nobody who can't stand that Amelia and I are more successful than you." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Ethan, with all his confidence and flash, didn't realize he was digging his own grave. "Success?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. "You call misusing the fund's money success? You call hiding violations and living lavishly on other people's money success? Blue Spark Labs isn't just a company, Ethan. We build AI applications that help hospitals save lives. We develop free software so underprivileged kids can learn online. That's success to me. And you? What have you built besides a vineyard estate in Napa Valley?" The small living room fell silent. Amelia bowed her head, her hands gripping her expensive handbag tightly. My father looked at me and I saw a flicker in his eyes, perhaps recognition, or maybe just shock. Ethan stepped back, collapsing onto the sofa as if my words had drained his strength. You don't understand, he muttered. I needed that estate to impress investors. I did it all for the fund, for the family. Don't lie, I cut him off, my voice harder than I intended. You did it for yourself, Ethan, and you too, Amelia. But this has to stop. I'm demanding that Robinson Ventures operate transparently. No more financial abuse, no more cover-ups. If the family doesn't agree, I'll send all the reports to the SEC, and trust me, they won't go easy. Amelia burst into tears, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of remorse or just fear. Matt, you can't do this to us, she said, her voice choked. I'll lose everything, my reputation, my career, everything. Do you want Ethan and me on the streets? I looked at her, part of me wanting to hug her, to tell her it would be okay. But I couldn't, not after what they'd done. Amelia, I said, my voice softening but still resolute, you and Ethan had your chances. You chose to live extravagantly on other people's money. I didn't. I want the fund to operate properly for the sake of the shareholders, the people who trusted us. And if you don't change, I'll make sure justice is served. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Matt, he said, his voice heavy, do you know what this will do to the family? Robinson Ventures is our legacy. If you blow this up, the whole family will collapse. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see the powerful, invincible father I'd feared as a child. He was just a man, trying to protect what he'd built, even if through misguided means. Dad, I said, my voice almost a whisper, a legacy isn't a fund or a name. A legacy is what we leave behind for the world. I built Blue Spark Labs to create real value for communities, for people who need it most. If Robinson Ventures collapses because of the truth, that's not my fault. It's because of the choices this family made. No one spoke after that. Ethan stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Amelia wiped her tears, but her eyes now held not anger but confusion. My father stood, adjusting his suit jacket, and I saw him age in that moment. We'll talk again, Matt, he said, his voice dry. But remember, you're still my son. Don't let this destroy the family. He turned, gesturing for Amelia and Ethan to follow. Amelia stood silently, walking to the door. Ethan paused, giving me one last look, his eyes full of resentment. You'll regret this, Matt, he said, then left. The door closed and I stood alone in my small apartment. The sound of their car faded into the hum of Austin's nighttime streets. I sank onto the sofa, feeling as if the weight of the world had crashed onto my shoulders. I didn't want to hurt my family, didn't want to be the betrayer in their eyes, but I couldn't let them continue. Not for my sake, but for what I believed in. Transparency, responsibility, and the true meaning of building something lasting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my laptop reading emails from the Blue Spark Labs team who were tirelessly working on new projects. An educational app for underprivileged rural students, an AI tool to help small hospitals optimize resources. Those were the reasons I got up every day, the reasons I didn't need a penthouse or a yacht. But my family, they wouldn't understand, at least not yet. The days following the confrontation at my apartment passed like a silent storm. No angry phone calls, no accusatory messages, no sign from Amelia, Ethan, or my father. That silence was more unsettling than I'd expected. It wasn't reconciliation. It felt like the calm before an inevitable explosion. I knew my family. They weren't the type to accept defeat easily, especially when their reputation was at stake. But I couldn't wait for them. I had my work, Blue Spark Labs, and projects waiting to be completed. Still, every time the phone rang or the doorbell buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was them, ready for a new battle. A week after the shareholder meeting, the news began to spread. An article in the Austin Business Journal bore the headline, Robinson Ventures faces allegations of financial misuse from major partner Blue Spark Labs. The article didn't mention my name, but it referenced an internal audit and questionable transactions involving key members of the fund. I knew this would be a slow-burning bomb in Austin's tech investment circles. Amelia, as the public face of the fund, was surely facing a media firestorm. Ethan, with his flashy startup, was likely being grilled by investors. As for my father, I couldn't bear to think about how he was feeling. I didn't want to destroy my family. I only wanted them to stop, to realize that their actions didn't just affect the fund, but the hundreds of investors who trusted them, the projects Blue Spark Labs and other partners had funded. But now, with the news spreading, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I had opened Pandora's box, and now I had to face the consequences. One morning, as I was brewing coffee, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding. "Matt," her voice trembled over the line. "Can you come home for a bit? Your father wants to talk." I sighed, knowing I couldn't avoid this forever. "I'll be there, Mom," I said, then hung up. I put on my old jacket, climbed into my Toyota Camry, and drove to the family's suburban villa. When I stepped into the living room, the air was heavier than it had been the last time I was here, during Thanksgiving. My father sat in an armchair, holding a glass of whiskey, his eyes weary. My mother stood beside him, her hand gripping his shoulder as if trying to keep him from falling apart. Amelia and Ethan weren't there, and that made me uneasy. "Sit down, Matt," my father said, his voice hoarse, lacking its usual authority. I pulled out a chair, sitting across from him, feeling like a child waiting to be scolded. "Have you seen the article?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. I nodded. "Yes, Dad." He took a sip of whiskey, then set the glass on the table, the clink of glass against wood sounding stark. "Amelia has stepped back from the fund's public projects," he said, his voice flat, like he was reading a report. "Your sister is working with a financial advisor to rebuild her reputation. As for Ethan, he's enrolled in a tech project management course. He says he wants to prove he's not a failure." I stayed silent, unsure of what to say. Part of me felt relieved, at least they were trying to change. But another part was skeptical. Amelia and Ethan weren't the type to admit fault easily. They might be doing this just to salvage their image, not because they were truly remorseful. "And you?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "What do you think about all this?" My father looked at me, and for the first time in years I saw a glimmer of sincerity in his eyes. "Matt," he said, "I was wrong to underestimate you. I always thought you were different, not ambitious like Amelia or Ethan. But I didn't know what you'd built. Blue Spark Labs. I've read about your projects, the free apps, the tools for hospitals. I'm proud, but I'm also ashamed. I didn't see you, not really." His words were like a knife, both painful and healing. I wanted to stand to hug him, but I stayed seated, my hands clenched under the table. "Dad," I said, my voice catching, "I didn't do this to tear the family apart. I just wanted things to be right. Robinson Ventures is your legacy, but it can't go on like this. You can't misuse shareholders' money, can't live extravagantly on what isn't yours." My mother stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Matt, my boy," she said, her eyes red, "we're family. We can fix this, can't we?" I looked at her, wanting to say everything would be okay, but I couldn't make empty promises. "I hope so, Mom," I said. "But Amelia and Ethan need to take responsibility, and the fund needs to be more transparent." My father nodded, though I could see his hesitation. "I want to visit Blue Spark Labs," he said, his voice firmer. "I want to understand how you run your company, how you build these meaningful things. Maybe I can learn something from you." I was surprised, not expecting those words from him, but I just nodded. "All right, Dad. I'll arrange it." As I left the villa, night had fallen. I drove back to my apartment, my mind in turmoil. My father wanted to change, or at least he was trying. But what about Amelia and Ethan? Were they really changing, or just putting on a show to save face? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. A few weeks later, I received an email from Amelia. It was short, unlike her usual flamboyant style. "Matt, I'm working with a financial advisor to review my expenses. I know I was wrong. I can't promise I'll change overnight, but I'm trying. Don't hate me, okay?" I read the email over and over, searching for sincerity in the words. I replied, "Amelia, I don't hate you. I just want us to do what's right. If you need to talk, I'm here." I didn't know if she'd actually want to talk, but I left the door open. Ethan was different. He didn't reach out directly, but I heard from a mutual friend that he was genuinely taking a tech project management course. He'd even started researching small startups, trying to learn from their operations. Part of me wanted to believe he was changing, but I remained skeptical. Ethan had always lived for appearances, and I wasn't sure if he truly understood the value of doing right or was just trying to regain investors' trust. Meanwhile, Blue Spark Labs kept growing. Our educational app was piloted in several rural Texas schools, and the feedback from teachers moved me deeply. One wrote, "My students are excited about math for the first time. Thank you for doing this for free." I read that email in my small apartment, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. This was why I worked, why I didn't need a penthouse or a yacht. As promised, my father visited Blue Spark Labs one morning. I showed him around the offices, introduced him to my team, young programmers, passionate designers, people who believed in our mission. My father listened, nodded, and for the first time he looked at me as an equal, not as the failed son. When he left, he shook my hand, gripping it tightly. "Matt," he said, "I can't promise I'll change right away, but I'll try. And I want you to keep doing what you're doing. You're right about a lot of things." I nodded, saying nothing, but inside I felt a spark of hope. Maybe my family was starting to change, even if just in small steps. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat on the sofa looking out the window. Austin's city lights twinkled, and I thought about my journey. I'd gone from a mocked programmer to the head of Blue Spark Labs, from a family outcast to someone who forced them to confront themselves. But above all, I'd learned that success isn't a destination. It's a journey, one of perseverance, doing right, and leaving a meaningful legacy. I opened my laptop, reading an email from a rural teacher thanking us for the educational app. "The kids say they want to be programmers like you," she wrote. I smiled, typing a reply, "Tell them to dream big and never let anyone say they can't." That was my message, not just for the students, but for my family and for anyone listening. I stood, brewed a cup of coffee, and looked out at the city. My small apartment, my old car, my simple life, they were enough. Because I knew in my heart I was building a legacy not just for today, but for generations to come. And that to me was true success.